His grave was dug before he ever died. Strange title, isn't it? But what if I told you? It's not just a story. What if I told you that bloodlines carry curses? That fate sometimes carves your tombstone long before your first breath? 7 generations, 7 blood-soaked chapters, and a secret buried deeper than bone and soil. This tale begins centuries ago, with a whisper in the wind and a scream that was never heard. One man, one mistake, and a legacy drenched in terror. Each descendant carries a piece of the truth, and a price that must be paid in flesh. Are you ready to descend into madness? Would you dare uncover the curse that outlived the men it consumed? Then follow closely, because this isn't just horror. This is hereditary hell. Now I've got a question for you. If you found a grave with your name already carved into the stone, what would you do? Comment your answer below. I want to hear your take on this nightmare. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with fellow horror lovers. Trust me, you do not want to miss what's coming in the dense wilds of 1721 Black Hollow, a place unmarked by maps and feared by nearby settlers. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. Trees twisted like they were hiding secrets. Animals avoided the hollow, and locals whispered that the earth drank blood faster there than anywhere else. In the heart of this cursed land stood a cabin, more bones than boards now, rotting and sinking into the dirt like it wanted to disappear. Inside lived Ezekiel Thorne, a man with sunken eyes, a thick black beard and hands always stained with earth. They called him the grave digger, though no one ever saw him bury anyone. Truth was, Ezekiel never buried the dead. He buried the living. The first time it happened, it was his own brother, Samuel. They were young, maybe 20 and 22. Samuel had wandered into the hollow chasing a deer he meant to kill for meat. He never made it back. Ezekiel returned from town a day later and found Samuel kneeling in front of their cabin, eyes wide open, skin pale, whispering to something behind the trees. Ezekiel watched for a moment, unsure if his brother was playing a cruel joke. Then Samuel turned his head, but his body didn't move. Only his head rotated unnaturally, like a broken marionette. Blood dripped from his mouth. His voice came out in a rasp. "I dug it for you, Zeke. It's ready. It's waiting." And then he collapsed. Behind him in the moonlit mist was a freshly dug grave, wide and deep, with Ezekiel Thorne already carved into the crude stone above it. Ezekiel should have run then. He should have burned that land to ash. But he didn't. Pride or madness, maybe both, told him to stay. He buried Samuel in that grave. And the next morning, the stone had changed. It no longer said Ezekiel Thorne. It said Samuel Thorne. That night the dreams began. Every time Ezekiel closed his eyes, he was trapped underground, his fingers clawing at roots, soil cramming into his throat. A whisper always followed. "The dead is one, 6 more to pay." He woke gasping, coughing dirt, real, black dirt, in his mouth. The village of Dry Hollow soon grew uneasy. Children went missing. Livestock turned up flayed, as though skinned by blades made of bone. Townsfolk blamed wolves, then witches, then each other. But no one suspected the quiet man at the edge of the woods, the grave digger with sunken eyes, until little Miriam Cutter, age 7, went missing. Her doll was found just past the border of Black Hollow, and beside it, a tiny grave, unfilled, unmarked, freshly dug. A search party was formed, lanterns, pitchforks, and prayer. They came for Ezekiel, but when they stormed his cabin, he was gone. All they found inside was a wall scratched with names. 7, in total. The top one had already been crossed out, Samuel Thorne. Below it, Ezekiel Thorne, Miriam Cutter, Daniel Rook, Elspeth Crane, Isaac Holloway, and one name no one dared speak aloud, Abaddon. The next night, screams echoed from Dry Hollow's church. The priest had been found dead, his face peeled off like fruit skin, nailed to the door. Scrawled in blood below it, "One must dig, one must lie, one must watch." By dawn, another grave appeared in Ezekiel's land, this time filled with the priest. The villagers began to whisper of ancient things, long before men came to settle. Of a creature bound beneath the hollow, locked in by ritual and blood sacrifice. Ezekiel, they said, had broken that pact by burying someone alive. The land demanded blood, but now it demanded his. And so Ezekiel returned. He stumbled into the square at midnight, dragging a shovel in one hand and a bag of severed hands in the other. "They're not enough," he shouted to no one. "It wants my line, my blood." The villagers fled, except one, Silas Crane, a woodsman and hunter, stepped forward. "What have you done, Ezekiel?" Ezekiel's eyes were red, not from tears, from soil. Dirt bled from them. "I didn't dig his grave," he whispered. "It dug mine, before I was even born." Then, before anyone could react, he turned the shovel on himself, ramming it into his own gut, fell to his knees, and laughed as he died. They buried him just beyond the cabin, thinking it over. But the next morning, his grave was empty. His name had returned to the stone, and next to it, a new one appeared, Silas Crane. No one ever found his body, but the villagers knew the curse had passed. From that day forward, no map ever recorded Black Hollow again. Travelers vanished, trees twisted tighter, and some nights, if the wind was still, you could hear a shovel striking the earth, again and again and again, not to bury the dead, but to welcome the living. 1823. 100 years had passed since Ezekiel Thorne vanished into the soil of Black Hollow, but the whispers never stopped. The hollow remained, untouched and avoided, a scar on the land that no blade of grass dared grow upon. But men forget, and time lies. In the outskirts of what had now become the town of Greymarsh, a descendant unknowingly stirred the bones of the past. His name was Edric Crane, a surveyor by trade. Edric had no taste for superstition. He wore logic like armor, and believed in numbers, not ghosts. Hired by a land company expanding the railroad through forgotten areas of Appalachia, Edric's maps led him to the edge of Black Hollow. The map he carried should have ended in forest, but there, scrawled in faded ink, was a symbol he didn't recognize. A circle of jagged thorns, and beneath it, a single word etched in blood-red ink: Doug. Doug. Edric didn't flinch. He chuckled, shook his head, and pressed on. The trees grew stranger as he entered the hollow. Gnarled trunks bent toward him like eavesdropping figures. Moss clung to the air like cobwebs. The silence was wrong. Not the calm of nature, but the absence of it. Then he saw it. The stone. Weather-worn, barely visible, yet somehow untouched by time. It rose from the ground like a tooth. On it were names carved in hasty, frantic script. The top one read, Ezekiel Thorne, and just beneath it, Edric Crane. He staggered back, nearly tripping over a root that hadn't been there moments ago. What the hell? The moment he touched the stone, a wave of pressure slammed into his chest. His ears filled with static. His vision swirled. He saw fire, screaming, a spade splitting flesh. He saw a girl with no eyes, a priest with no skin, and in the center of it all, a man with a shovel whispering a single word over and over: 7. His fingernails packed with soil, but he had no memory of digging. By the time Edric returned to Greymarsh, he was already hearing voices. They followed him into sleep, into silence. They hissed from inside mirrors, echoing behind closed doors, always saying the same thing: "You're already buried." His wife Katrina noticed the change. Edric became withdrawn, erratic. He stared too long into the fire. He avoided their daughter, little May, as if terrified she would vanish into smoke. One night he awoke in the backyard, standing over a pit, a grave. A child's grave, unfilled. Katrina wept as she packed to leave, but Edric stopped her. Not with his hands, with his voice. It wasn't his anymore. Deep, echoing. Other. "You'll die in the ground if you leave me." Katrina fainted on the spot. When she woke, Edric was gone. So was May. The authorities searched the forest for weeks. They found the child's shoes, placed side by side at the edge of Black Hollow. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just a single word, carved into a nearby tree. Katrina was institutionalized by winter. She babbled about graves that didn't need shovels, about earth that opened by itself. She claimed she saw Edric at night, pacing just beyond her window, dirt falling from his mouth, whispering, "I dug too deep." 10 years passed, then 20. Gray marsh grew, swallowed by railroads and miners. People forgot. The forest crept back over the edges of the hollow, hiding its teeth once again, until Thomas Crane, a distant cousin of Edric, moved into the outskirts, a builder not a digger. One day, while clearing land for a farmhouse, his men unearthed a bone, then another, then a grave. Inside was a doll, waterlogged and eyeless, wrapped in what looked like a child's dress. He halted construction immediately, but it was already too late. The night they found the doll, Thomas's wife woke screaming, not from a nightmare, from the sound of dirt being shoveled beside her bed. There on the floor was a small mound of earth, just enough for something to fit inside. She fled, barefoot into the cold, and collapsed at a neighbor's door. By dawn, Thomas was gone. So was the doll. She wept as she told him of the graves, the voices, the names she kept hearing in her dreams. Ezekiel. The preacher nodded, very slowly. Then he stood up, and from behind the altar he pulled out a rusted shovel. "I've been waiting for you," he said, and swung. She was never seen again. That week, the grave appeared once more in Black Hollow. The stone now read, Ezekiel Thorne, Samuel Thorne, Edric Crane, May Crane, Thomas Crane, Katrina Crane. Only one name remained unmarked. Abad, and just below it, carved in fresh lines, a new one had appeared. Jonas Gray, a man who hadn't been born yet, but whose grave was already waiting. 1895. The town of Graymarsh was no longer a hushed whisper on the edge of wilderness. It had become a boom town, a place of promise, industry, and steam-powered dreams. But at its center was a house no one talked about. It stood on the edge of what used to be Black Hollow, a manor made of dark brick and iron. Tall gates wrapped it in thorned vines like claws. It was said the land beneath it screamed at night. No one who lived near it planted anything. The soil was always too warm, too red. This was the house of Jonas Gray. He was a recluse, a scholar turned medium, a man of rational beginnings, who had turned, they said, to madness. Gray was not his birth name. He had changed it at 20, cast off the Crane legacy after his mother vanished in the asylum, and his cousin was found buried alive inside a wooden coffin that had no lid, just nails driven into his chest. Jonas inherited a book, bound in skin. It had only 3 words on its cover. He still digs. He had found it in the walls of his father's study, sealed in a hollow space behind a mirror. Its pages whispered when he touched them, and in sleep they screamed. The house was not empty. Not really. Something lived in the cellar, something that never came out, but dragged sounds into the walls at night. Sometimes breathing, sometimes clawing, sometimes digging. Jonas spent years recording what he heard. Spent days in the cellar with candles, chalk, and blood drawn from his own arms. He wasn't trying to banish it. He was trying to understand it. And that's when the dreams began. He dreamed of a spade breaking rib cages, of dirt that moved like water, of a figure with no face, hands blackened by rot, whispering in his ear, "We are 6, you are the 7th. When he woke, his feet were muddy, and the cellar had grown larger. He started receiving letters, no return address, each sealed in wax bearing a thorned circle. Inside always a scrap of parchment bearing a single line. The grave is not where you think. He burned the first one, buried the second, ate the third. But they kept coming. One day a box arrived. Inside it, a single human tooth, wrapped in a ribbon of his own baby blanket. Madness took him slowly. He stopped eating, began talking to mirrors, painted his windows with ash. He drew sigils on the floor with a mixture of black bile and ink. Hired no servants. Let no one in. Yet somehow every door creaked open at night. One morning he found a noose hanging from the rafters above his bed. Another, his bathtub filled with bones. but none of them were his. The grave outside the manor had grown bolder. It was no longer hidden. A stone rose from the earth, fresh, smooth, new. On it, Jonas Gray, no birth date, no death, just a name. Waiting, packed what little he still valued, books, candles, an iron dagger said to kill spirits. But the road twisted, trees returned where there had been none. The sky darkened, even at noon, and the manor loomed again before him. No matter where he turned, it was there. One night, in desperation, Jonas broke the locks on the cellar. He went down with a lantern, a crucifix, and a revolver. He descended and kept descending. 13 steps, then 13 more, then 20, then 40. The air got colder. The light dimmed, the walls began to breathe, and finally, he found it. A coffin, not made of wood, not of stone, but of living things, roots twisted into shapes. Eyes blinked across its surface. Blood oozed where hinges should be. He opened it. Inside was himself, dead. Mouth open in a scream. A shovel jammed down his throat. His name stitched across the inside of his jacket. Jonas fled, shrieking. His hair turned white within a week. He nailed shut every entrance to the cellar, burned the books, smashed the mirrors. But at night, the digging came again, closer, louder. The last letter he ever wrote was found smeared in blood across his bedroom wall. I am the grave. I was born in it. I will die outside it. And still, it waits. But on the 7th night, after his disappearance, smoke poured from the manor. Villagers watched from afar as the house burned black and red. They dared not go near. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but scorched earth. And a stone. 7 names now carved, each one split, with a single crack, as if lightning had struck it from beneath. The final name. Still waiting, still unfilled. A bad 1927. The town of Graymarsh had long since been consumed by progress. Railroads had sliced through the land, new industries thrived, and the once feared Black Hollow had become little more than an inconvenient, forgotten piece of real estate. The Graymarsh mansion, burned to the ground nearly 30 years prior, had long been reduced to rubble, its foundations cracked and the earth around it softened by time. But one thing never changed: the name. Abaddon. The name no longer seemed a whisper. It felt like a shadow cast over the entire town, hovering in the air like smoke that would not leave. The older folk still spoke of it, the cursed land, the vanishing of the Greys, the bloodlines that ran through Black Hollow's soil. But most people had forgotten the danger. The curse was something wrapped in myth and superstition, a quaint story told by the fire to scare children. That was, until the day Lillian Moreau arrived. Lillian, a young widow, moved to Graymarsh after her husband's death in the Great War. She sought a quiet life, far from the chaos of the city, where she could tend to the land and heal her wounds in peace. Her house was small, perched at the outskirts of the town, right where the woods began to swallow the last remnants of civilization. The locals were kind enough, but distant. No one spoke to her much about the old stories. They were too busy with their daily routines, too absorbed in the modern world to worry about ghosts and curses. But one thing Lillian couldn't ignore was the strange sensation she felt when walking near Black Hollow. It tugged at her chest like an invisible thread, as if something in the air was calling her. The ground, too, felt alive. She couldn't shake the feeling that the earth was watching her, waiting. One evening, while walking her dog just beyond the edge of the woods, Lillian came across a patch of land that looked untouched, a hollow surrounded by twisted trees with thick branches that seemed to curl toward her. There, beneath the roots of a massive oak, she spotted a stone. It was weathered but distinct, a marker. At first she dismissed it as another forgotten gravestone. But something about it gnawed at her. As she knelt closer, her breath caught in her throat. The name carved into the stone was Lillian Moreau. Lillian's heart pounded, her eyes darting around as if the trees themselves were watching her, waiting for her to run. But she couldn't. She had to touch it. Her fingers traced the cold surface of the stone, and the moment she did, the earth beneath her feet shifted. She stumbled back, gasping for breath as the ground seemed to groan deep and hollow. The air grew thick with heat, suffocating her, and the wind howled through the trees as though an unseen force was pulling her down. A deep, familiar voice echoed from the woods, low, guttural, like a whisper from beneath the earth. "You are marked." Lillian ran back to her house, heart racing, breath ragged. She locked every door and shuttered the windows, yet the feeling of being watched never left her. In the silence of the night, she heard a sound scraping, dragging, like the gnawing of claws against the earth. She dared not look out the window. Then came the knock, soft at first, then louder. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the door. Lillian's pulse quickened. She opened the door slowly, peering into the darkness beyond. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure, a man tall and gaunt, his features obscured by the flickering candlelight. "I know you," he said softly, his voice haunting, familiar. Lillian froze. There was something about him, something she couldn't place, but she felt a bone-deep recognition. His eyes glinted with a strange knowledge. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The man stepped forward, revealing himself fully. His skin was pale, stretched tight across his bones. His face was angular, sharp. A scar ran down the side of his cheek, and on his forehead, barely visible, was a faint mark, a thorned circle. "I am the one who digs," the man whispered, his lips curling into a grotesque smile. "The one who waits." Lillian slammed the door shut, but she could hear his voice on the other side, muffled but clear. "The grave is calling you, Lillian. You must return. The dead is 7. The following days were a blur. Lillian could not escape the pull of Black Hollow. The earth beneath her feet seemed to hum with an energy she couldn't deny. It called to her, marked her. As the man had said, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to return to the hollow. With trembling hands she gathered a lantern, a knife, and a small vial of salt. She steeled herself, but as she stepped into the woods, her heart thundered in her chest. The trees closed in around her, blocking out the moonlight. The ground beneath her feet shifted again, as if it were alive. When she arrived at the stone, it was no longer just a stone. It was a grave. The earth had opened, and from it there was a black pit, a swirling vortex of dirt and decay. Lillian could feel the pull, like an invisible hand dragging her down. She tried to step back, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The wind howled, and the voice returned. "You were always meant to die here." She was falling into the abyss that had waited for her, her name already etched in the stone, waiting for her to join the others who had gone before. 7. 7 graves. 7 names. 7 bloodlines. But there was something worse. She hadn't died yet. 1948. Greymarsh had become an unremarkable town. The industry that once pulsed through it had faded, like the last remnants of smoke after a fire. The great factories that had once employed hundreds now stood abandoned, their windows shattered, walls crumbling into the earth. Yet, amid all this decay, the old stories persisted. Whispers of the cursed bloodline, of the grave of 7, and of those who had disappeared, lost to the hollow, buried beneath the dark soil. And one of those whispers carried the name of Caden Byrne. Caden was an investigator, a man who prided himself on his logic, his skepticism, and his ability to uncover the truth behind any mystery. He had heard about Greymarsh's infamous past through an old friend in the Historical Society, and like any good researcher, he found himself drawn to the town like a moth to a flame. The story of the Grey family, the house, the curse, it was the kind of tale that made his skin crawl, and the more he learned, the more he felt compelled to dig deeper. Literally, he rented a small house on the edge of Greymarsh, away from the town's ruined heart, where the land had grown wild and untamed again. From there, he spent hours sifting through old records, speaking to the few remaining locals, and collecting whatever remnants of history he could find. He learned about the Greys, their rise and fall, the strange deaths, the disappearances, the unexplainable events, Everything pointed to Black Hollow. The name haunted him, Abaddon. It was in every journal, every record. It was a name that had survived time, yet no one seemed to understand its full meaning. The curse had not died with Donis Gray or Lillian Moreau. It lingered, still waiting to claim the next bloodline. But Caden refused to believe in curses. He was a man of science, not superstition. He would uncover the truth. The one evening after weeks of research, Caden decided to visit Black Hollow. He needed to see the land for himself, to understand why it had such a powerful hold over the town. The locals warned him against it, of course, but warnings had never stopped him before. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and his determination, he ventured into the woods. The moment he stepped foot into Black Hollow, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thick, heavy with an oppressive, unnatural heat. The trees towered above him, their twisted branches reaching out like clawed fingers. There was no sound save for the crunch of dry leaves beneath his boots. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Caden felt an undeniable pull, a weight that pressed against his chest. He ignored it, pushing forward. It wasn't until he reached the heart of the hollow that he saw it, a stone, cracked and worn by age, but still standing proudly in the center of the clearing. The words were faded, barely visible in the dying light. Caden knelt beside it, his fingers tracing the letters. Caden Byrne. A chill ran down his spine. He felt it again, the pull stronger this time. It was as if the earth beneath him was alive, calling him, beckoning him to join it. His mind raced. This wasn't possible. There had to be a mistake. He was not part of this cursed bloodline. But his name was carved into the stone. The bloodline of Greymarsh had always been intertwined with something darker, something far older than mere human history. And now it seemed, the land was claiming him as its own. Caden's hands trembled as he stood up, backing away from the stone. He felt sick, dizzy, as if the air was pressing in on him, suffocating him. He stumbled backward, unable to tear his eyes from the stone, the name that should not have been there. The ground beneath his feet suddenly shuddered, as if it had come alive. Caden froze, his pulse quickened. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, but it was not the wind that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. It was the sound coming from the earth itself, a low, rumbling growl, like something ancient and furious was waking beneath him. A voice gravelly, otherworldly, echoed through the woods. The seventh will rise, the seventh will fall. Caden's heart raced. He knew what it meant. He had heard the stories, he had read the old record. The bloodline of Abaddon, the cursed family, the endless cycle of death and resurrection, the ones who were buried before they ever died. And now it seemed, he was one of them. Panic clawed at Caden's chest as he turned and ran. He didn't know why he ran. Maybe it was the terrifying realization that the land was alive, that it had claimed him, that he was now part of something far beyond his comprehension. Maybe it was the chilling certainty that if he didn't get away from Black Hollow, he would end up as another name on that stone, just another lost soul added to the twisted history. But no matter how fast he ran, the pull of the hollow was inescapable. It clung to him like a shadow, like the weight of something ancient and patient. He could feel it drawing him back, pulling him toward the center of the woods, toward the place where the earth had opened and swallowed so many before him. By the time Caden reached his house, he was covered in sweat, his legs aching from the desperate flight. But even now, as he slammed the door shut and locked it, he could feel it. The earth was waiting. The house was silent, too silent. He tried to calm himself, tried to make sense of what had happened, but the unease gnawed at him. He pulled out the notebook in which he had written down his findings over the past weeks, flipping through the pages, searching for something, anything that could explain the horror he had just experienced. But then his eyes stopped on a drawing, a crude sketch he had made of the grave in Black Hollow, the one marked with names, the one that had haunted him from the moment he first learned of it. There at the bottom of the page, in the same hastily scrawled handwriting, was a note: the seventh must dig. Caden's blood ran cold. The night passed in restless fits of sleep. Caden dreamt of Black Hollow, of the stone, of the name, and every time he tried to wake up, he felt the ground pulling him back down, drawing him deeper into the soil. But each time he awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, the air around him felt heavier, as though something had crossed into his house, something old and hungry. Then at dawn, he heard it, a soft scratching sound, like claws dragging across the floor. Caden's heart skipped a beat. He froze, straining to hear. The sound came again, followed by a scraping noise from downstairs. The door to his study creaked open by itself. The scraping grew louder. It was coming closer. He couldn't move. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence was deafening. Then a voice, soft, familiar. "Caden." The whisper was so faint it was almost drowned out by the pounding of his heart. But then it came again, stronger this time. "Caden, I've been waiting for you." He turned slowly, his eyes fixed on the corner of the room where the shadows seemed to writhe. The figure that emerged from the dark was barely human, tall with long limbs that seemed too thin, too stretched, its face obscured by the darkness. But Caden could feel its eyes on him, burning into him. The voice continued, rasping through the air like a dry wind. "The grave has opened for you. Your blood has been called. The debt is owed. You are the seventh." Caden stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of a chair. He fell to the floor, unable to tear his gaze away from the figure. It moved closer, its presence suffocating, like the weight of the earth itself, pressing down on him. And in that moment, Caden understood. The curse of the grave of seven wasn't just a story, it was a cycle that had been in motion for centuries. Those who were marked, those whose names appeared on the stone, could never escape. Caden was one of them. As the figure loomed over him, Caden's mind raced for an escape, for a way out of this nightmare. But the voice, soft and terrible, filled his thoughts. "There is no escape. The earth calls for you. You will join the others, and the seventh will dig." In that moment, Caden felt the ground beneath him tremble, like it was shifting. A low rumble echoed from the walls, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth. He could hear the distant sound of something digging, scraping, digging, closer and closer. 1962. Greymarsh was no longer a forgotten town. It had become a place of pilgrimage for those who sought the truth, or perhaps those who were drawn to the dark ancient power that had once festered there. No longer just an abandoned village, its once derelict streets were filled with tourists, scholars and thrill-seekers, all searching for stories of the Grave of Seven, the cursed lineage that had begun long before Jonas Gray and had stretched unnoticed into the present. They spoke of it in hushed tones at night, the abandoned house, the name Abaddon, the bloodlines that had disappeared without a trace, and one name still haunting the land, Caden Byrne. Caden had not been seen for weeks after that night, when the figure had appeared in his home. The last anyone heard, his house was left abandoned, doors open, windows shattered, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished, erased from existence. And yet rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed he had gone mad, lost to the same curse that had claimed the Greys before him. Others said they heard him in the dead of night, scratching at the earth, calling for something, someone beneath the ground. But no one dared go near Black Hollow. Not after what had happened to Jonas Gray, or Lillian Moreau, or any of the others whose names were etched into the stone. That was until Iris O'Connell arrived in Greymarsh. Iris was a journalist, a skeptic by nature, who had come to the town with only one purpose: to debunk the myth of the Greymarsh curse. She had heard of Caden Byrne's disappearance, and after hearing the locals speak of it in fearful whispers, she was convinced there was a story to be uncovered. There had to be a logical explanation. There had to be a rational answer for why a town could be so gripped by a curse that had lasted for centuries. She was determined to uncover the truth, to piece together what had happened to the people who had disappeared, and perhaps to finally put the story of the Grave of Seven to rest. But the more she delved into the history, the more questions she had. The old records, the faded letters, the sketchy accounts, they all led to the same chilling conclusion. Greymarsh was no ordinary town, and its history was far darker than she could have imagined. One evening, after a long day of interviews and digging through town archives, Iris found herself standing at the edge of Black Hollow. She had been warned by locals not to venture too far, but the lure of the mystery was too strong. The air around her felt heavier, thick with something ancient, something alive. The trees whispered, their branches twisting into shapes that seemed unnatural, like skeletal fingers beckoning her to come closer. And there, beneath the cover of the twisted trees, she saw it, a stone, half buried in the earth, its surface weathered and cracked with age. She approached it cautiously, her breath shallow, her heart hammering in her chest. The stone was old, ancient, and on it, barely visible in the fading light, was a name, Iris O'Connell. Iris gasped, stepping back in disbelief. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the ground, her feet unable to move as the full weight of the situation dawned on her. She was no stranger to strange occurrences or supernatural legends. But this was something far more sinister. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't an accident. This was her name, her future. She turned to run, but the air around her seemed to press down, making it difficult to breathe, to move. The earth beneath her feet groaned and shifted, and a low, rumbling sound echoed from deep within the ground. She stumbled backward, falling to the soil, her head spinning. "The seventh will rise," the voice whispered, its tone guttural and cold. "The seventh will fall." Suddenly the ground before her split open, the soil cracking as if something massive was moving underneath it. Iris scrambled to her feet, but she was paralyzed by the sound of something digging, scraping, raking, tearing at the earth. It was close, too close. And then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was not human. Not entirely. It was taller than any person she had ever seen, its limbs long and twisted, its skin gray and cracked like dried mud. Its face was a hollow mask, empty and featureless, save for the hollow eyes that burned with an unnatural, malevolent light. It moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps, dragging a rusted shovel behind it. Iris could feel the pull of the figure, a magnetic force drawing her closer, urging her to step forward, to join it, to accept her place in the cursed lineage. The figure spoke, its voice an unnatural blend of rasp and whisper. "The seventh will dig, as the seventh always had." Iris fought the pull. She staggered backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind racing. There had to be a way out, a way to stop this. But the figure, Abaddon, was already upon her, the shovel raised high, its shadow darkening everything around her. With a scream she turned and ran, the earth shaking beneath her feet as the figure followed. Its footsteps were silent, but its presence was suffocating, its power too overwhelming to escape. The ground cracked beneath her, and the walls of black hollow seemed to close in around her, the very forest alive with a malicious intent. Not until the sound of scraping was lost to the wind, and the voice of Abaddon faded into the distance. When she finally reached the town, her legs gave way. She collapsed on the dirt road, gasping for air, covered in sweat and dirt, her heart still racing. She had narrowly escaped, but deep inside her she knew the truth. The curse was not a story. It was not an old tale or a myth. It was real, and no one who carried the name was safe. In the distance, far beyond the trees, a figure stood watching her from the edge of Black Hollow, the shovel resting on its shoulder. And in that moment, Iris knew the cycle was not over. It had only just begun. In 1973, Graymarsh was no longer a town. It had become a ghost. The streets that were once filled with curiosity and dread were now empty. The town was fading, decaying with each passing year, as if the curse that had hung over it had finally consumed the very land itself. No one dared to live there anymore. Not since the disappearance of Iris O'Connell and the strange events that had followed her. The Hollow, though, still stood, dark, watchful, alive. But the worst part, no one had come looking for answers in years. Everyone knew the story, but no one dared to unearth it again. And those who did never returned. In the heart of the town, at the edge of a now abandoned road, a young man stood. His name was Isaac Byrne, and he was a descendant of Caden Byrne, the seventh to be born in the cursed line. He had come to Graymarsh with only one purpose: to end the nightmare, to break the cycle. Isaac had heard the stories, the warnings, the whispered words of his ancestors. He had been raised on tales of the grave of seven, of the names that were carved into the earth, of the people who were buried before they died. And it was his fate, his duty to dig his own grave. Isaac had known this day would come, even as a child, the day when he would have to face the curse that had plagued his bloodline for generations. He had never believed it, of course. Like Caden, like the others before him, he had always thought the stories were just that, story. But when his father had vanished without a trace, and when his mother had died under mysterious circumstances, Isaac began to understand. The curse was real. The Hollow was waiting. And now it was his turn. Isaac walked toward Black Hollow with grim determination, his heart pounding in his chest. He had prepared himself for this moment, knew that there was no escaping the fate of the Greys. But what he didn't know was how the land would react, how the curse would manifest, how it would claim him. The trees parted before him, as if parting for a king or a victim. The air grew thick and heavy, like it had when Caden had first set foot on the cursed soil. The whispering wind rustled through the twisted branches, and Isaac felt the pull. It was there, the feeling of something ancient and hungry that had been waiting for him. He could hear it at the back of his mind. He reached the center of the hollow, the clearing where the stone stood, but it was not the stone that he sought. It was the earth beneath it, the ground that had claimed so many, that had swallowed them whole, their bodies turned to dust and forgotten by time. Isaac didn't know what he was supposed to do. He only knew that he had to dig. He sank to his knees, pulling a shovel from the satchel he had brought with him. The soil was soft, as though it had already been prepared, as though it was eager to swallow whatever it could. Isaac gritted his teeth and began to dig. The earth shifted beneath him. It was subtle at first, just a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. But then it grew louder. The soil buckled, as if something deep within was stirring, pushing up from the depths. Isaac's hands trembled, but he kept digging, desperate to understand, desperate to finish it. The rumbling intensified. The trees around him began to tremble, their roots uprooting, reaching for the sky. A crackling sound filled the air. The earth was alive. The ground beneath Isaac's hands grew warmer, as if it was breathing. And then he found it. A bone, dark and charred, twisted as though it had been burned by fire or something more unnatural. Isaac recoiled in shock, but he couldn't stop. He had come this far. He had to finish. He kept digging, his hands raw and covered in the foul-smelling dirt, until his shovel struck something solid, something metal. He dug around it, his heart racing. A coffin, ancient, rusted. It had to be. He gripped the edges of the coffin, and with all his strength, pulled it free from the earth. The lid creaked as it slowly opened, revealing a dark and hollow space. Isaac hesitated, his breath caught in his throat, but the whispers from deep within the hollow seemed to urge him on. And when he looked inside, he found it. A body. His body. Isaac's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the decayed corpse that lay in the coffin. It was him, or rather it would have been him. The corpse was twisted, malformed, its limbs stretched unnaturally, its face contorted into a grotesque grin, the flesh shriveled and dry, but there was no mistaking it. The bloodline had called him. He staggered back, falling to the ground in horror, his mind spiraling. This was it. This was the end. He had dug his own grave. He had come to fulfill the curse that had haunted his ancestors. And yet as he stared into the hollow, lifeless eyes of his doppelganger, something else happened. The earth groaned once more. The body began to twitch. Isaac felt it then. The overwhelming sensation of something pulling him into the soil, into the grave. The air thickened, and a terrible cold crept over him. He tried to move, to escape, but his limbs felt heavy as though the earth had begun to claim him. The whispers grew louder. The seventh will rise. Isaac gasped for air, clawing at the ground beneath him, his fingers sinking into the dirt. He could hear the shuffling of footsteps behind him, the unmistakable sound of something approaching, but there was no time to escape, no time to run. The earth had already claimed him, and then as his vision blurred and his breath grew shallow, the last thing Isaac saw before he was consumed by the darkness of the hollow was the rusted shovel lying beside him. The seventh had dug. The end. Thank you for following the journey of his grave was dug before he ever died. The cycle is complete. If you'd like to hear more stories or delve into different worlds, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.